Hello, everyone. I'm Kevin Allen, and I'm absolutely delighted. This is a very special day because today represents a return after 5 years to a place where my soul lives. I just bought a house here in the UK, and it also is extraordinary because I'm speaking to my people. I'm a growth guy. I'm a new business guy. I always was, and I always will be. Yeah, they had a lot of fancy titles for me, but at the end of the day, this is the subject that I love. So it seems so prophetic that I'm speaking to all of you on this very day. So I'm going to tell you a few stories, but I'm also going to tell you about my point of view about business development. And I guess what I would say is, well, I'll start with a story. If you said hello to Kevin at 5 years old, he would burst into tears. I mean, Kevin was one fragile kid, very, very, very emotional. And I remember listening at the top of the stairs to my mother talking to my aunt, Aunt Thelma. I had an Aunt Thelma, if you can imagine. And I remember her saying, "He's so fragile. He's so emotional. I don't know if this kid's going to survive." And what I would say to you as a thematic is, little did I know that the emotional sensitivity that was seen as a weakness and a vulnerability, and in the archetype of business when I first started getting into business as undesirable, proved to be the greatest possible gift I could have been given. Little did I know there would be eventually something called emotional intelligence. Right? But when I think about business development and I think about what Peter Drucker said, the goal of a company is to create a customer. All the rest are costs. And one of the things that struck me about the early days of advertising was sort of a hierarchy. And I can tell you that as a rather sensitive person and someone who didn't come out of the archetype, combined with the fact that I was in the closet. So the idea, if you came out in those early days in the 80s, that it was basically a recipe for killing your career. And so I remember meeting a colleague of mine. He was a mentor. And I told him that I had overheard a conversation in the hallway of someone who said, "Yeah, he's a nice kid, but he's a little soft." And I knew I was being denied the roles in the agency that I dreamed of. And he said, "Let me tell you something. You bring them $100 million, and believe me, they're not going to deny you a place in the boardroom." And I can tell you this precisely what happened. So I'm in academia now. Yes, I'm teaching, and I'm even pursuing my PhD. And I don't know if you've ever heard something called the syllogism. If birds have wings and wings make you fly, then birds can fly, right? So here's the syllogism from my perspective. If growth is the lifeblood of an agency, and business development people are inextricably tied to growth, then business people are the very lifeblood of an agency, and I believe that with my soul. Although I have to say, I was the first officially titled growth officer at Interpublic back some years ago, and I remember all my friends would call up and said, "You're going to be what? Couldn't they call you president? What's this growth thing?" And growth, yeah. Can you take this thing off my back? And all these kind of crazy comments. But I love the term of growth. Growth is producing wealth. Growth is creating jobs. Growth is well-being. And when we think about our role, I won't even say your, I'll say our role in this process, it's one of leadership. If you think about it, someone once said to me, the only time that the entire firm comes together, really and truly, is at the Christmas party and around a pitch, where virtually every facet of the organization is mobilized. And in that regard, I believe that you're a leader more than anything. When a super tanker comes into port, it's not the captain that brings that ship into port. It's the pilot, because the pilot knows the waters. So the stewardship of business development is a leadership game. So I want to tell you two of my favorite pitch stories. First is the very first pitch I ever gave. I was 22, and I decided I was going to cold call the French government tourist office. Yeah, cold call. And And so I did. And I kept calling and calling, and I got a hold of a gentleman by the name of George Hearn, who was the director. And he said, "You're a cheeky fellow." He said, "Let's have lunch." So we had lunch. And long story short, I noticed when we sat at lunch, he had one of those red ribbons, I guess an award given when you're in France, very, very prestigious thing. And I said, "What's that, George?" He said, "Oh, well, that's an award. It's a great honor for what I have done for the French government in the United States. In fact, my father was a Texan and my mother was French, and I'm very proud of my French heritage." And I walked away with an instinct about what it was that George cared about. Now, before I tell you more about that, when I was writing my first book, I called a lady, I guess I called my mom, and I asked her, "Do you know anyone who sold door to door?" Right? I don't know if anybody listening has sold door to door. Right? It's pretty hard stuff, right? And I asked if she knew anybody. She said, "Of course, Enid Merrin. Don't you remember?" Now, I remember this lady. She was the top saleswoman for World Book Encyclopedia, because you realize that this woman sold encyclopedias for a living by knocking on doors. So, and I remember, guess what, that she drove a white Cadillac, which was the prize for being the top saleswoman. So, so I called her. She's like 88 years old. And I said, "Enid, you got to tell me something. How on earth did you do this? I mean, just think about it. You walk down the street, you go up to a house you've never met before. What?" And 20 minutes later, someone's writing you a check. How does this work? Right? And I see Jill. Jill was a trainee at Nest, a stint in the selling stock from the boot of your car. Yeah, it's not so easy, is it, Jill, right? So she said, so when I said, "Well, Enid, how on earth did you do it?" She said, "A mother doesn't want a set of encyclopedias. She wants her kid to be president." Behind every decision of every kind is a powerful emotional motivation. And it used to make my colleagues crazy that I used to say to them, "We're not pitching an ad campaign, and get used to it. We are understanding and connecting to the emotional motivation of our prospect, and when you do, you win." And people used to ask me, how is it possible that McCann Erickson, who in those days wasn't necessarily the most creative place in the world, how is it that you guys have an 85% hit rate? It's because we understood and practiced systemically a careful identification of the emotional motivation of the people we were pitching to. Now, back to George. So we put the pitch together, and on the day, of course, bearing in mind that I'm just a little kid, right? And on the day, in the conference room, our entire management team is ready for the pitch, ready for the pitch, the European French delegation to come through the door, and we're waiting. The meeting was at 10 o'clock. 10 o'clock, 10:10, 10:15, and all of a sudden, and of course there were wall phones in those days, the phone rings, and I go to the phone. "Hello? Kevin, it's George." "George, yeah, where are you?" He said, "Kevin, the meeting's here." I got it wrong. The meeting was on the other side of town. So he said, "No, just a minute. Just listen to me. Do exactly what I tell you. Just repeat after me. Yes, George, I understand. It's no problem. Yes, George, I understand. It's no problem. We'll be right over." And so we packed ourselves up. Meantime, the senior management look around going, "Something's fishy here." So anyway, we go across town into the French government tourist office and sit down, and George takes the floor. Now I'm thinking, I am so fired. This is it. My career is over. And he stands up and he says, "Ladies and gentlemen, I just want to say that, when you get to be my age, you get very forgetful. And I want to apologize to Kevin and the entire McCann Erickson team for getting the location wrong. And I apologize." Ha! He took the rap. Now, when I had lunch, we won the business, by the way. And when I had dinner with him, I asked him, obviously, the obvious question. I've asked every prospect since then, "George, why on earth, A, did you do that? And B, did you give us the business?" And here is the thought that I want, one of many thoughts I want to leave with you. He said, Kevin, I'm not hiring the agency. I'm hiring you. The business development person, the growth person, whatever nomenclature you want to call it, is an embodiment and a representative of all the spirit and essence and joy that is about the agency, and in many ways is the ambassador and representative of your firm. And first and foremost, yes, of course, George liked everybody he met, but first and foremost, he believed in me. And always remember that they're buying you. And for your team, they're buying the team as well. How many times that I was given an account when I knew, frankly, that the work wasn't necessarily what it ought to be. And yet, because of the emotional motivation, it was. Now, in terms of organizing yourself, does selling Avon, yes, Diana, it does. So I think one of the things that was a key to my success was not only being more and more confident in doing my homework on the emotional motivation, but it was convincing my colleagues of the worthiness of this endeavor and that business development is not normal run of business. And by the way, I applied these disciplines when I was made worldwide director of accounts, and our accounts grew like crazy. So this is not only a pitch strategy, it's about growing business as well. Anyhow, in the garment district in New York, there's an old expression, there's two people in the business. There's the inside person and the outside person. So one of the things that was vitally important for me to do was to have like a duality, not only of me as the outside person who was emotionally intelligent, had what I call the smeller, the emotional antenna who could smell out the landscape, but a really good inside partner who loved discipline and organization. That was Margie. And they used to call it the Kevin and Margie show. I mean, it was literally crazy that we used to argue like crazy, but she would be the person to say to me, yes, but Kevin, you didn't answer line item number 46A. And I would want to strangle her. But the fact of the matter is the inside-outside duality is a vitally important strategy. I loved some of the comments. I couldn't resist listening in, and I heard some discussion of culture. And by the way, that's what I'm doing in my PhD, is the role of emotion in the development of corporate culture. And one of the things that strikes me is, I would even say change your title, Chief Belief Officer, because in a way, it is my undying belief that people buy like-mindedness, and they buy a like-minded point of view from the point of view of what you value. I had a client, for example, we have a game-based learning company now, and they told us, well, in fact, we hired you because of the value system video that was on your site. So, yes, Nikki, Mark Clark, my babies have grown. I see all these people that I work with. I'm so thrilled to be seeing, and I heard that Magnus is now a big cheese and all this, and so I can't wait to see you all. And thank you, Jill, because the mistake that's made in business development is sometimes the right person in the wrong job. If they're looking for an inside person, you don't want to put yourself if you're an outside person, But I will say you, if Kevin didn't have an inside person, I would have failed. So it's really important to have those things. Now, so let me tell you, so if the French government tourist board was probably my first cutting of teeth, and the first lesson I realized, I better get an inside person because I probably wouldn't survive getting the address wrong again. So let me set the stage. So $100 million account, the MasterCard business, which we had been chasing for literally over a year, and which tells you, by the way, that assiduous courting of long-term prospects is a profoundly good thing to do. And I know it's hard to do because you go and call on someone and then you think, okay, where's the business? It's going to take time. You got to make sure that you're courting long-term players while you're chasing the short-term stuff. And so from 50 agencies down to 6. And we were invited by the MasterCard people to show up at the New York Hilton into the ballroom. Imagine that. So we walk into the Hilton, and there are 6 tables, like a wedding, right, with white tablecloths. And at each table are 3 empty seats. And all of the agency representatives, there were 3 representatives for each agency invited. And of course, I can love this because we've all been there, right? You go there and all the other competitors, and you sort of like, snarling, snarling at each other, smiling, sort of like, yeah, I'm going to murder you, And so the marketing director comes and says, right, okay, welcome, please sit down. Each agency, Leo Burnett, if you be there, McCann Erickson there, please, Gray Advertising there, and Messner, Viteri, Berger, and Schmetterer, and they're going to come on to who they are in just a moment. And please, if you will sit down and say that you have 15 minutes to speak to the people at your table, and then after which I will ring this bell and you move to the next table. Okay, so speed dating, I guess you could say. So I got sat next to the CEO, right? So I'm in my 30s. I'm still, pretty young character. And now, when you are in search for the emotional motivation, or what I call the hidden agenda, as Mom used to say, if you ask a silly question, you get a silly answer. If you ask a functional question, you get a functional answer. So tell me about the market share and the blah, 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 blah. Who cares? If you don't know that already, you should know it, right? So I asked him, Mr. Anderson, where do you see yourself in 3 years? And how do you think your people are feeling right about now? And his whole body language changed. And I didn't even finish the sentence when he said, 18 months, Kevin, 3 years. If I don't get this right in a year, this whole thing won't exist. How are my people feeling? I think they're worried. And in that moment, that's when I'm pitching. Of course, I'm going to share an ad campaign. By that time, at that point, I didn't even know what the ad campaign was, but I certainly knew what the pitch strategy was. Then I go to the ding, 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 go to the next table, sit down next to the next guy, and I sat down to the number 2 CMO, a guy named Larry Flanagan, instantly liked the guy. And I said, Larry, Mr. Anderson said something very interesting. He said that he's concerned that perhaps you won't be here in a year. He said, Kev, all I want is I want to know what it feels like to beat Visa just once. So now let me cut to the next scene. But in the intervening time, I'm going to talk about it in a sec, is called pursuit strategy. In other words, how do you take the brief that you get, but synthesize that with the powerful emotional longing of your prospect? Because they are doing a pitch because of something that deeply troubles them or something that they deeply seek and desire. Yeah. So on the day, now it's the pitch day, they walk in the room and they see a great big MasterCard logo that said Carpe Diem. And I took the floor and we decided we wouldn't do the normal, we used to call it wheeling out the old man, which is finding the oldest person in the agency and wheeling them out to go, yes, I want to tell you what a pleasure it is to be here. And I'm so proud of my people, I could just shit. What a kind of crap. And instead I got up and I said, we have found the soft underbelly of Visa. Your DNA coincides with the societal movement. Let's just put it this way. We believe that a marketing plan is a carefully designed plot to murder the competition, and that is precisely what we're going to do. And I could see the look on the chairman's face. He was sitting in the back of the room and going, I've come to the right place. That entire pitch was a case for murdering Visa. Yes, of course, we presented marketing insights. Yes, of course, we presented a target. Yes, of course, we presented, but what it is what you do in court. I call it the advocate's approach. You are making a case that you're going to murder Visa, or they're going to go to the moon, or whatever aspiration it is that your prospect is seeking. And so we pitched, and of course, the priceless campaign was pitched in that room as evidence that that campaign would beat Visa. And so when the pitch was over, now, I don't think people wait by the phone anymore because there's no phones on desks anymore. But at that time, I waited by the phone. Have you done that? You sit by, you're waiting for the prospect to call, and you know fully well that the phone's not going to ring when you hope it will. And the phone rings. And it's not the CMO, it's the number 2, Larry. I said, Larry, put me out of my misery. What? He said, Kev, there's another round. You got to be kidding me. He said, yeah, they're going to take you and the Priceless campaign from McCann and Messner, Viteri, Berger, and Schmetter are in their campaign. They could put it into test. Whoever tests the best wins the pitch. And so both campaigns went into test. And they came out of test. And how do you think Priceless scored in the test? Any idea? It was a disaster. It tested terrible. And by definition, we should have lost the business. And I remember a moment in time, and this is another thing I would encourage you to do. Remember the concept of leader. There's moments in this process where you must be heard. You know, I never saw myself as a facilitator. Never, never, never. And here is the research company and MasterCard in the room with us in our conference room, which we used to call Battlestar Galactica, giving us the news. And I, of course, was the youngest person in the room, and there was the CEO and all these other people. And I thought, and of course, they, they're presenting the results. Of course, the results of the AM is really, really terrible, and it's one of the lowest scores we've ever had, and blah, 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 blah. And by the way, it's a really good way of breaking into a meeting. You ready? If I may. And the whole room just goes, and then the CEO was looking at me with daggers like, I told you not to say anything. Yeah. For 2 months, we have watched consumers all over the country react to this advertising. And not only react to this advertising, but our consensus that this advertising would increase our market share against Visa. And I don't want to be here in 10 years knowing that we said no to this because of them. And I pointed to the researchers. At that point, the CEO was like, I am so going to kill you. And I got a real, he really took me to task. But Larry Flanagan, the number 2 CMO, went to the board of directors and said, I don't care what the board test scores say. I believe we can win with these people. And on the day they came in purportedly to tell us we didn't get it, 4 representatives from MasterCard, and sometimes things just don't work out the way you expect them to. And they reached under the table in unison, 4 of them, and lifted up 4 bottles of champagne that said, MasterCard and McCann Erickson, priceless. And we're like, so what I learned from that experience has stayed with me to this day. I'm still a pitch person. And I still pitch for our accounts for our company. And that people are mobilized by emotion. And I will say this, I don't believe there's anybody more important in an agency, but you are the lifeblood. You are among the most important people in any company. And don't let anybody ever infer otherwise. Now, I'm going to close with one little comment, which will lead us, I guess about 15 minutes or so for questions and answers, if you'd like. And it is about creating a following, because I really do believe that's what this is about. When I met Angela Ahrens when she was at Burberry, when I was still living here in the UK. And she read when she was, and we did some work for her, and she said, I read your book, Kevin. It's not a selling book, it's a leadership book. And so my final comment is from my favorite movie, The Wizard of Oz. And at the end, of course, she's, they go back to the wizard. Okay, the Wicked Witch is dead, and we're going to send Dorothy home. And I go, well, she goes, well, wait a second. What about them? I mean, you promised the heart, you promised the courage, and you promised, brains. I mean, come on, what gives? And so, the professor's like, oh, geez, what am I going to do? She's like, oh, okay. So here's a diploma for the scarecrow, and, here's a courage for lion gets the medal. And then he goes, So my tin friend, you have asked for the hardest thing. You've asked for a heart, because a heart can be made to be broken. But remember this, my tin friend. A heart is not judged by how much you love, but by how much you are loved by others. The more you give, the more emotional sentiment, the more you connect to people and prospects with generosity of spirit, the more successful you're going to be. And you know what? You don't have to be an archetype to do that. So my dear friends and my beloved friends, some of whom I see on this very, very chat, I am so glad to be back. And so allow me to turn, perhaps open the floor in the remaining time we have, and perhaps entertain some questions. Oh, thank you. I just see some comments. Thank you. Yeah. Any questions or thoughts? That's right. I'm just reading Mark's. Exactly. We're mechanical, we like a fight. Yes, that's exactly right. And now here's what's important in that is understanding the DNA of your brand, right? I call it your core, because connecting to the hidden agenda or the emotional motivation is with who you are. Now, when we turned Lo around, I helped Lo to realize that the core was we are craftspeople, but not only creative people, we're craftspeople. Yeah. So in McCann, it was very, very much like fighting. So thank you, Mark. I do remember that. What's the pitch loss I most regret? Let's see. I think that the very first pitch I made when I got to London, it was in 1999. It was for Goodyear. And I worked for months on that. And I approached it like somebody I wasn't. Because I was so petrified that people were going to find me out. In other words, I was perfect man, you know. I mean, so in fact, I'll tell you a little quick story in that regard. And I learned a big lesson. Jill, I'm so glad you mentioned this. The biggest lesson of my career came from that pitch. So when I got in the agency business, and I started taking stock in who Kevin is. So Kevin comes from a rather poor family, raised outside of the city of New York, raised by a single mom, terrible board scores, couldn't do math, in the closet, blah, blah, blah. And I figured, you know what? The only way that I'm going to be seen as legitimate is to be somebody I'm not. Out of a nearby phone booth, it's perfect, man. Hi, I'm the business development director. And I remember when I was at Ketchum, the CEO met me in a pitch room, and he took me aside and he said, it was really an amazing presentation. Can I give you some advice? I said, yes, Mr. Gange, you need to take that stick out of your ass. Be yourself, right? And so I forgot that lesson. So when I got to the UK, I should not have forgotten that. So thank you for that, Jill. What are the right questions to ask to unearth the hidden agenda? I think there are three different hidden agendas. There's the hidden agenda of aspiration, there's the hidden agenda of fear, and there's a hidden agenda of value. So what I do is I toggle between those questions. So for example, I'll ask an ambition question. What do you seek? Or what keeps you up at night? And by rotating those through, I keep my antenna up and I watch their body language. And you see them. As soon as you hit it, you're going to see their reaction. Adam, that is the question of the century. Why do agencies underinvest so heavily? I think that I left the business in 2010, and I started my own companies, and I have been working closely with corporations. And what's extraordinary is any major corporation's single biggest investment is in marketing, and yet agencies, I think it is still an egocentric, creative-centric business. That's not bad, but I think it means that there is an uneven view of what is important inside the firm. That's just Kevin's view. And I fought like crazy, and there were titanic battles between me and even Jim Heacon, who was my partner in crime, or the financial people. And by the way, you know what I started doing? I just started doing stuff and not asking. Don't ask. You can ask forgiveness all you like. And I remember them coming to me, how dare you spend $45,000 on a presentation? Yeah, but I just won 10 million. How do you like them apples? Right? So I did some pretty cheeky things, and I got in a heck of a lot of trouble and was seen as really a big troublemaker. So blow it up if you need to, yeah? How do you think the pitch process needs to change? Well, obviously, it needs to be faster, and obviously in remote, it changes things. For example, for our game-based learning company, it's all remote, I sometimes get no more than 25, 30 minutes to pitch. I do believe that the homework, the emotional homework is the same, so that I can pivot between a lady who, for example, wants to see my digital forensics versus the creativity because I've done my emotional homework on who that is. And by the way, the other tool I forgot to mention is profiling, using like Myers-Briggs like profile. Who is this person and how do they make a decision will be based upon their profile, yeah? So I think using technology effectively, notice I haven't used a slide. You know what it's like, excuse me while I share my screen. It's literally like, okay, would you like root canal now? Right? Try in these times to use the techniques of this to make an emotional connection, because at the end of the day, that's what it's about. Okay, let's see. When you have a big personality, how do you give voice to the team if their personality is somewhat quieter? I think one of the ways I do that is if I'm in a room for a prospect, is how I introduce my team. And this is something that you can do. Suresh Nair, who was our very quiet strategic planner, who stole the show with the line, 87% of people believe their purchases are justified, which was his moment. Instead of going around the room and say, oh, my name is so-and-so, I do the introductions and I say, let me tell you why Suresh is here. And I'm going to make him crazy because he's a little on the quiet side. But if you want somebody in your foxhole that knows something about how to talk to the customer, he's your guy. Celebrate your people, giving them the confidence to be the people that they are. Sometimes in a meeting, especially if you're a leader, you have to be what I call a validator, which is your role is not the pitching per se, it is the underpinning of the people in your room. Yeah. What advice should you give to someone starting out in business development? Put yourself in harm's way. And I'll never forget the first conversation I had with the CEO of Ketchum, where I had my first job, and of course it's very hierarchical, so you couldn't really talk to anybody. So it was the Christmas party, right? Remember Christmas parties from earlier. So I wanted to talk to Mr. Alvarez. So I go up to him, and I don't know if you're in this position, I get really nervous, right? So, and my voice goes up several octaves. So when I got up to him, he sort of turns to me, and he was literally like, looked like James Bond, this guy, and he goes, hi. And I go, I want to be you. He goes, oh, okay. He said, what, do you have a question for me? I said, yes. How did you get to where you are? And he said, find the toughest, smelliest job in the agency and go do it. And if there's a pitch, whether you belong in it or not, stick your nose in it. And I never forgot it, yeah? So make sure that whatever task in the business development process, even if you're the newest person, because guess what? You're being seen. You're being propelled because your presence and profile is noticed by the very top people in the agency, yeah? And do your homework on that prospect. Offer insights about the people. Do homework on who they are and present those to your colleague, yeah? Isn't it crazy that marketing agencies aren't always willing to invest in their own marketing? Yes. What do they say? The shoemaker's child is a barefoot child, yes. But I would say that the single most important thing that a business development person must do is to be an advocate And I remember my first presentation to the board of directors of McCann of Interpublic as the first chief growth officer. And I walked in there and they gave me a $2 million budget. And I walked in, I did tell David Bell what I was going to do, and he said, you go ahead and do it. And I said, ladies and gentlemen, it is impossible to grow this firm with what has been budgeted. And so I cede you this position. Now, I knew that David was not going to fire me. But the point is, you've got to argue your corner, yeah? Robin Bond, now there's a fine person. I'm so happy to see that. How do you think the agency landscape will change in the next 3 years? I believe there's a great book written by the father of positioning, right? Al Ries, called War in the Boardroom, written a few years ago, but it was very, very prophetic. Now sitting on boards, what we call them, non-executive directors, I get to hear what's being discussed in the room, right? And I promise you, the C-suite is not talking about just-in-time inventory. They're talking about growth. They're talking about where is the customer coming from. And guess what? That means that there has never been a better time to be in this business. Never. The role of agencies will grow, provided the agencies see themselves not as an executor of advertising, but as a growth consigliere, as advisors to companies on how to grow their business via what we do. You know, agencies slowly walked themselves out of the boardroom a few years ago, but it's time. Shoot high. Call the market, call the CEO. And you know what? Believe me, they're taking calls from all kinds of folks, yeah? Okay, so let's see. Okay. Oh, how sweet of you. Thank you, Nikki. So I see it's 4:53, so I'll just finish with one more quick anecdote, and then I'm gonna turn the floor to your colleagues to say, I can't wait to be reunited with the friends I know, so many of whom I see on this call. Can't wait to meet you all. And, you know, if you think about what is my job, it's best said by one of the greatest figures, my Shiro, as she used to say, Maya Angelou, who used to say and said, like her, as far as I'm concerned, her greatest quote, that you may be forgotten for what you said, and you may be forgotten for what you did, but you are never forgotten for how you make people feel. And that's the business we're in. So I wish you all the greatest of success. Congratulations, Richard, on this incredible landmark. This is so needed. No one understands this crazy world that we do. It's the toughest job in the business, the most thankless job in the business, and the most important job in the business. Mwah. Thank you very much. Take good care.